What's the most horrifying "how do you not know how to do this" moment you've experienced with another person whilst adulting? A friend who was pushing 40 had never paid a bill before. She had gone from living with her parents to living in a dorm to living with her parents again until she got married, then she got divorced and was living on her own for the first time. Got a text from her asking if my power was out too, then she realized it was just her. Her excuse was she never paid attention to the bills because she thought they were receipts and that the cost was included in her rent. Her water was cut off a couple weeks later and we had to talk about that, too. Every few weeks I catch my roommate trying to put his metal de-strainer in the microwave. This is in spite of the fact that our first week living in this apartment, he destroyed the microwave and had to pay for a new one because he put a metal de-strainer in the microwave. My best friend was sleeping with a new guy. She said she wasn't sure of his sexual history but she was on the pill to prevent STDs. I was like edit, okay, my inbox is blowing up. She's a smart girl, from a very traditional Chinese family. They never discuss sex or anything, and if I recall she actually didn't attend health class with us due to her parents opting out. I taught her everything she knows. I even had to teach her about lube and blowjobs, so hey. She's happily married now and no, she doesn't have crazy STDs. Had a guy constantly asking what time JD is. By the sixth time I said, bro, there is a clock right there. He said, I don't know how to read it, grown ass man. Couple weeks later on Facebook someone shared a picture of cursive writing. He made fun of the people who couldn't read it. I posted a picture of a clock and said, what time does this say? He blocked me. My friend in college once lamented, ugh. I have to pee and I just put a tampon in like 5 minutes ago. I hate having to pull them out dry. Also it's such a waste. Her mother taught her that there is only one hole down there and peeing with a tampon in is not possible. It will mess up your bladder. Took a lot of me showing articles and diagrams and answering questions to convince her there are, indeed, 2 holes. She peed while the tampon was still in and called her mother in utter shock to share the good news. I had a roommate at university whose cooking method was put baked beans in a Tupperware, seal the lid, turn on microwave, when lid pops and explodes beans everywhere they're cooked. Edit, well, this kinda blew up way more than I expected. So in light of that, I'll share another story of his cooking methods. One time I came home to find the oven on and smoking a bit. Opened the door to find what was an entire lasagna bubbling on the bottom of the oven. He bought himself a frozen lasagna. Step 1, remove outer packaging. Step 2, place on middle tray of preheated oven. He literally thought that outer packaging was anything outside of the lasagna, so he tore away that shell that the lasagna cooks in and placed it straight on the rack, so as it defrosted it just fell through the rack and all over the oven. I remember when I first started dating my now husband, I was hanging out at his apartment waiting for him to get out of work. His place was a bit messy, so I decided I'd tidy up for him a bit. Fast forward to the next morning and he comes in a little shocked. Why would you load the dishwasher like that? I had never had a dishwasher before in my life, Lamau. We're talking cups facing up, big ass pan shoved in, the whole 9 yards. Thank God he stuck with me, lol. 19 Yo dude, how do you cook a fried egg? Gave him instructions and left him to it. Came back a while later to ask how it went. Fine in the end, but it took a few attempts because the yolk kept breaking. What do you mean kept breaking? Well, I kept throwing them away because I thought breaking the yolk made it poisonous. Once again, he was 19 years old. Ooh, I got one. I work as an EMT for a private company, so we mostly deal with nursing homes and the elderly. One day when I was about 6 to 8 months in, I got assigned a partner who was in my orientation class. He was a little older than me at the time, like mid-20s, but he seemed a little childish. Maybe he's just sheltered, I think to myself. Anyways, we got a patient I've had a few times before. She was a sweet, little old lady with COPD and CHF living at an assisted living. Call was for pneumonia. She's prone to this stuff, so it wasn't a huge deal. Slap her on oxygen and keep her sitting up till we get to the hospital. The first red flag though, was this kid didn't know anything. He didn't know how to take a blood pressure, he couldn't find the medical history or medication on the paperwork, which is clearly labeled. He didn't even push the stretcher, just walked next to it with a hand on it. When I asked him about all that, he said my partners usually do that for me, so I put her on an oxygen mask and sit her all the way up, mildly agitated. I tell myself it's just one shift with this kid. He's in the back with her and I tell him to just switch the oxygen from the bag, which is a small tank, to the main tank, which is huge, because with the amount of oxygen we're giving her, the bag will run out not even halfway before the hospital. It's about 25 minutes, which normally wouldn't be a huge deal. But when we pull up to the hospital and I open the back doors, I'm shook. The oxygen mask isn't inflated, meaning she isn't getting oxygen. She's pale as shit. I can literally see her accessory muscles moving, struggling to breathe. And this kid was sitting behind her, with a clueless half smile on his face, looks at me and says the main tank is broken, so I left her on the bag. This woman, who needs oxygen without pneumonia, was barely breathing for at least 15 minutes. And this idiot didn't even check. We take her into the hospital. I ask him to find an oxygen tank while I explain to this woman's daughter what happened. He says he doesn't know where to look. I find it and told him to talk to the daughter. When it's all said and done, I check to see what's broken. He didn't turn on the tank. Worked at an on-campus store that sold a lot of essentials for students living at dorms. I had one girl ask me what laundry detergent was because she never did laundry. She asked if I could help her do her laundry, but I declined as I couldn't leave the register, which of course she was mad about. Sorry, I have to actually do my job, lady. More of a how do you not know to not do this. First year at uni, a girl in my halls is microwaving some food and left it in the metal foil container. It took 3 fire engines to put out the fire and we had to have a new kitchen installed. Not to mention, this was at like 3 a.m. and I had an exam the next day. I was not impressed. Edit, okay. Apparently not knowing microwave safety is pretty common. So do people not study basic physics anymore? My faith in humanity wanes daily. My ex and I were cooking together and one of the pans got too hot, and we had a minor grease fire. She grabbed a bag of flour. As tempted as I was to slap it out of her hands, I didn't want to aerate a bunch of flour next to a grease fire, so I grabbed it with both hands and forced it, and her, because she wouldn't let go, over to the countertop, and then dropped the lid on the pan. I asked her what her logic was, and she said, well, you're supposed to put baking soda on a grease fire and not water, right? Yes. Why did you try to use flour? What's the difference? They're both white powder. Our kitchen sink has one tap, 2 things, don't know what they're actually called, for hot and cold. I walked into the kitchen and my partner kept switching between hot and cold. Asked him why. Well, the hot gets too hot so I run the cold instead for a bit. He didn't know you could run the hot and cold water at the same time. I had a friend who I noticed took Mucinex a lot. I've used it occasionally, when I've been congested, but it seemed abnormal how often I saw him taking it. I finally asked him why he was taking it one time, because he didn't seem sick at all, and he looked puzzled and said, well, I think I'm getting sick. I pressed further and he said because it's an expectorant. It turns out he thought you take an expectorant when you were expecting to get sick. This is going to sound weird, but manage a budget. Or just in general being money smart. One of my old roommates was really bright academically, but he was terrible with money. Each semester he would start off with a pile of cash from his parents and proceed to blow through it in about 2 months. I first noticed it with his dining dollars on campus. Every day it seemed like he would buy the most expensive sushi option on campus every day. We're talking maybe $18, which isn't terrible if it's once in a while, but this was every day. It's also college dining hall sushi, so the quality was also just okay without even considering the money spent. Of course, around midterms when his dining dollars would run out and he'd sort of panic and whine that he couldn't afford anything. But what was so strange, is that when he would start to run low, he'd sort of laugh about not knowing any way we could avoid going broke while continuing to buy only the most expensive option. But he'd also get really defensive when people wanted to talk to him about this. Eventually when he moved off campus it was the same thing. For the first 2 months he'd feast. He'd get delivery constantly, ordering just way too much food, and of course he'd never share it. But then once he'd nearly run out of cash, he'd buy like an emergency 50-pack of hot dogs and only eat that for the rest of the semester, while telling everyone else that they were lucky they had money to spend, and how not everyone had it so easy when it comes to money. He'd never directly say it, but there were always a lot of implied insults. My girlfriend, now wife, put a pan of oil on too high of heat and it hit the flash point and caught fire. She freaked out and went to get a large thing of water and I stopped her and tossed the pan lid on top until the flames went out. Then she asked me why I stopped her. I was very thankful that I was there the first time she had a grease fire. Not only could she have hurt herself, but it was in a college dorm and the whole friggin' place could have gone up. Not sure if this counts, but when I took a food safe course, someone asked if they could wash a turkey with dish soap. He failed the course. One of roommates in college would go through plastic spatulas like crazy. She'd melt them and wouldn't say anything about it. She'd only tell me when I'd go to use it and wonder why it was messed up. She'd always say it was due to the spatula being made of cheap plastic. No. I finally caught her one day. She'd be cooking something and would walk away leaving the plastic spatula in the pan while it was still on. Edit, fix some spelling. Also, I really did not expect this to blow up. Funny that so many people can relate. For those asking, yes, I know there are heat-resistant, wooden, and metal spatulas. Remember, this was in college though, so I went to Walmart and just bought the cheapest non-stick pan and utensil sets I could find. Honestly, I like them well enough and they fit my purposes. I never melted a spatula because I don't leave my utensils sitting in a hot pan. I also wouldn't allow my roommate to buy a metal spatula since that would mess up the Teflon. I have a couple. I once had my ex's parents coming over, and needed some help cleaning the house up to get ready for their arrival. I asked my ex to clean the bathroom for me whilst I cleaned the kitchen, and left him to it. I went in about a half an hour later and the bathroom was somehow dirtier, but the ex was sitting on the couch chilling. When I asked him why he hadn't cleaned the bathroom, he looked at me all confused and said he had. I asked him to come in and pointed out all the soap scum everywhere and how it was clearly not clean. He reiterated that he'd cleaned it. I asked him to show me how. He proceeded to pick up a bar of soap, lather up his hands real good, and just rub everything. He didn't even rinse it after. Just rubbed everything with soapy hands. And couldn't understand why I was staring at him open-mouthed. Same guy, a few months later. I asked him to mash some potatoes I'd boiled whilst I plated up dinner. He very literally did so, without draining out the water. Again, he didn't think what he'd done was in any way wrong, despite the weird texture and look of the potatoes. When my friend bought a house a month into home ownership, she asked me, very pissed off, when the city was coming to cut her lawn because it's starting to look like weeds. It was awkward when I had to explain that she needs to cut her own lawn or hire someone. My ex-best friend had told me that she had needed to buy another new vacuum cleaner, the third that month. I asked her what was wrong with it and she said it's not picking things up anymore. So I asked if she had dumped out the container. She didn't know that was a thing. I guess we were still in high school, but we were 18. Me and my buddy Ferris were just getting into going to the gym. We went with Ferris's friend Tom. After working out, in the changing room during some small talk, I saw Tom putting on a shirt. Tom put the shirt over his head, but didn't put his arms through the sleeves. He managed to pull the shirt over his torso so that it was adequately on before wiggling all about and bending his arms in odd ways to get them into the sleeves. I didn't take much notice to it the first few times. But after a few months it was apparent he did this every single time. Tom didn't know how to put on a shirt. At least efficiently. Eventually we asked Tom why he put his shirt on like that, and he said something along the lines of, "Wait, what? Don't I do it the same way you guys do?" I guess he had never really thought about it before then. Not sure if I'd call it horrifying, but pretty ridiculous, nonetheless. It's about me. I just moved into my first home in February of this year. I live alone and am single. Earlier this month I mowed my lawn for the first time. I have never mowed a lawn before, but I am thinking, how hard can it be? The answer, not hard at all. Prior to that, I had roped my brother into coming over and doing it for me, but this time I figured I need to actually learn. The lawnmower is an old push mower of my dad's that he had brought over about a month ago, and he quickly gave me the rundown on how to use it, but I was half paying attention. Plus, it's a lawnmower. So anyway, I go to start it up. Takes me at least 10 tries of pulling the cord as hard as I can with no luck until finally it fires up. I then proceed to begin mowing, and I know this thing is self-propelling, it says so right on it, but I cannot, for the life of me, figure out why it's so hard to push. The wheels aren't locked or anything, so I just figure it's a combination of me not having much upper body strength and my lawn having a lot of uneven spots/divots that prevented the mower from moving smoothly. I finally finish, sweating my ass off like I had just finished seriously working out. My yard is very small, Even I finished the front and back in about a half hour 40 minutes. Upon reflection, I'm still not convinced that the mower was self-propelling. I mean, I know I'm not strong and am somewhat petite, but still. So I'm sharing this story with friends and co-workers like, WTF did I do wrong? And they're all asking me about this lever, and I'm like, yeah, obviously I had to hold the lever down or the motor kills. Well, turns out there's a second lever that you have to squeeze in order to propel the lawnmower. I manually pushed them for around my whole yard, divots, hills and all, ended up with a blister on my thumb, and sweating profusely through my shirt, not to mention the few times I stopped it and had to restart it. I pulled the cord literally at least 20 times to get it to start again. I was waiting for one of my neighbors to come over and ask me if I needed help. The struggle was that obvious. I also learned about the little button that you push a few times to make starting easier. So yeah, mowed today, and let's just say that things went significantly better than last time. Growing up, my dad or brother would mow, and in college up until now, I have always lived in apartments or duplexes, nothing that requires residents to do any lawn care. So, at the age of 32, I have finally learned to use the lawnmower. Had to ask my roommate to please wash his hands after touching raw chicken. He was cool to just go about his day before I asked. He thought I was being a wacko neat freak. Same guy also thought his sheets wouldn't fit in the washing machine, so he just never washed them. When I asked him please not drop silverware down the garbage disposal and leave it, he said I had too many house rules. I was a drill sergeant in the U.S. Army. The first time you have to show an adult man how to shave is a little shocking. The worst one was the 24-year-old male that didn't know how to tie his boots. He had gotten through reception and pickup day by tightly lacing his boots and tucking the laces in. As they would loosen up throughout the day, he would just pull them tight again. The first Sunday I noticed his boots were barely staying on as he was marching back from dinner. I asked him what was wrong with them, as it's common for privates to have the wrong size boots when they get to us. He didn't know how to tie them. At all. Not a single knot. I spent an hour showing him how I tie my boots and different techniques if he gets hot spots or blisters. Then I assigned his bunkmate the task of making sure they were tied correctly when he left the bay. I kind of understood it. He came from a super poor neighborhood, single mom that worked all the time. He didn't have a lot of positive influences before joining the Army. I was a little worried about his comprehension skills since basic rifle marksmanship is kind of intense and takes some focus, but he did well. I was very happy that on family day he had his low quarters tied and was proud that he had learned so much. My mom and I moved in with my grandparents when I was 10 years old. You know, old enough to have learned how to do some basic chores, and certainly old enough to be taught more. Unfortunately, my grandmother, God bless her, was not only terrified of fire. Her mother had a problem with accidentally setting things on fire, but she was also a neat freak that insisted on doing everything herself so it was done right. My mom married my stepdad when I was 14 years old, and we moved into a house together as a family. He was horrified to learn that, at nearly 15 years old, I did not know how to wash and dry my own clothes, iron, load a dishwasher, or even use the stove. I could use the oven because I baked with my other grandmother when I visited, but I had never used the stove top. There are many more things he had to teach me, but those were the things that really had him worried about my ability to care for myself as an adult. It wasn't that my grandmother didn't want me to be able to care for myself. Her fears were just so intense that she didn't think about how not knowing these basic skills would affect me later in life. I am forever grateful to my dad for being the dad I needed, because God knows the biological one couldn't be bothered. Mom couldn't overrule her own mother when we lived with her, and by the time she married Dad she was sleeping at the hospital 5 nights a week because her schedule was so insane. I don't even want to think about who I would be if I hadn't had him to teach me, but I'm pretty sure I would have had to live off of chocolate chip cookies, brownies, and takeout through my 20s if it weren't for him. I probably would have smelled pretty bad from the lack of clean clothes too. Oh, I have a really funny one. I hope it doesn't get buried. Years ago, I bought a friend an electric kettle as a gift. Her boyfriend, who I'm still friends with and who passed along this story, came home one night to find her running out the front door of their apartment with a flaming kettle, and she threw it into the street. She was screaming about how it was a piece of junk because when she put it on the stove, over a flame, it caught fire and started to melt. He was laughing uncontrollably when he asked, "What did you think the cord was for?" They broke up soon after. I had to explain and show to my older brother that you can and should clean your Phillips beard trimmer from inside the little bits as well. We both got the same exact model as a gift on Christmas, I think, and turns out he hadn't opened up and cleaned the little rotary bits the entire time he had it. Years, literally years, at least 5, and was complaining how it's very slow and probably needs to be replaced with a new one. I thought that's weird, mine is around the same age and is still perfectly fine. So I turn it on and it makes this very gritty sound like the machine is so slow as if it's dying and stuff even though it's fully charged. I open it up and the little rotary blades were so clogged up with years old dust and hairs it was a miracle the thing was still working at all. Turns out he didn't even know you can open them. I cleaned it all nice and clean and the thing started working good again. As much as it can. Afterwards, read instructions please before you disregard something as broken. Back in 06 or 07. Was working selling a software licensing product to software vendors. I was working with a 50-something Californian lady, I'm from the UK, who was handling some of the incoming inquiries through our website. One day she asks, "Hey, we had a lead today from a company in Egypt. What should I do with it?" I said, well, follow it up of course." "Why would you ask?" She goes, "Because they're Arabs, and we're at war with the Arabs, aren't we?" FML. I then had to give her an education on the Middle East. I worked with a woman who forgot how to cough. She was in her 30s and rarely got sick, and when she came down with a bad cold one winter, she just kept making these pathetic little squeaking sounds. I tried to help, but it's difficult to explain a natural reflex to someone. Edit. Just wanted to add that she kept laughing at herself and saying, "I don't remember how to cough." 3 months into our freshman year of college, a friend of mine developed a rash. I suggested he look into hypoallergenic sheets and swap out his others. His response: "I've used the same sheets since we moved in, it's not the sheets." Mind you, not the same as sheets, but the same exact sheets unchanged and slept/eaten upon/etc. For 3 months. This isn't just one person, but I've come to the realization that many adults no longer have the ability to read a map or follow simple driving directions to a new place as they're completely reliant on GPS telling them when and where to turn. 2 instances that stand out. A person in my office building was standing at the door asking everyone coming and going if they'd seen a car mount GPS unit in the parking lot as they'd lost it bringing it in somehow. They were subbing, so I figured it must be an expensive model. I asked what it was, but it was cheap, and helped them look around under cars to see if we could find it, during which we talked. They were crying over the price of losing it. They were crying because they didn't know how they'd get home that night without it. Couldn't drive home from their job they'd worked at for months with a GPS telling them how. I was out with a friend doing some shopping in a part of a city we'd never been to before. We were in the parking lot of store A and wanted to get to store B, which we could see, but there wasn't a connected road between the two. Friend punches in the store on their iPhone to get directions and it gives of a 30-minute route that includes 2 toll roads. I thought there was no way it should take that much driving to get there, so I looked Google Maps and saw we could drive it in about 3 minutes by going 2 stores over and exiting from the back of that store's parking lot onto the road that leads to store B. They could not look at the map and then translate it to the real world, despite that we could literally see all the features we needed to follow. He ended up taking the 30 minutes route and paying the tolls because he didn't trust the map. I've seen a lot of other experiences similar to this, but those are the 2 that always stand out to me. I had to jump a friend's car that wouldn't start. It had a hard time, but I finally got it running. She immediately turns off the car and says, "Thanks so much, I'll call you later." Oh gosh, I have a few from when I first went to university, living in halls and realizing some people literally did not know how to cook a thing. There was one girl who bought chicken and kept it in the cupboard, despite being told by pretty much everyone else in the flat that it was meant to go in the fridge or freezer. Flat out refused to listen, kept putting it in the cupboard. Don't know how she didn't get sick. Another flatmate who didn't eat potato for almost a year because he didn't know how to peel them and didn't want to try. I tried to teach him. Then he realized he could buy pre-prepared. One guy who decided to take a nap whilst cooking sausages for dinner. Just left them in the grill and only woke up when the fire alarms were going off and the whole building was being evacuated. Finally, 2 girls who again almost caused a fire if I hadn't found them. These 2 were actually my friends and I was looking for them. Found them in one of the kitchens about to cook a stir-fry. They had a wok with about an inch depth of oil in the bottom, shimmering because it was so hot, and they weren't sure if it was hot enough to cook with yet. They were really glad I found them because they couldn't tell that it was boiling oil and were worried the food wouldn't cook. I was really glad I found them because if they had thrown their stir-fry veg in there it would have probably caused a fire, or at least spat boiling oil all over them. I turned it off and tossed one piece of veg in there, turned black almost instantly. Honestly, I was just shocked and appalled that so many 18-year-olds had never cooked for themselves before, and even worse that their parents had sent them off to fend for themselves not having taught them. It's actually scary thinking back. This is in part due to being rich enough to be out of touch and in part a general lack of general adult skills. In college, I had a friend named Mally. She was a couple years younger than the rest of the people in our group and still lived at home with her parents due to their very strict culture and beliefs about how an unmarried woman should not live away from home. But her dad was a doctor and also had family money, so they were quite wealthy for our area, the sort of wealthy where for her 16th birthday, they bought her a Porsche and when they didn't think she thanked them adequately for it, they returned it. Anyway, I remember when a group of us were at some of the guys' on-campus apartment, their toilet clogged. Mally, without really blinking, said we should call our plumber to get it fixed. Of course the guys were like, no? It's just clogged. Why would we call a plumber? To which Mally, who was very confused, replied, because that's what plumbers do. Why would you do it yourself? So we then explained first, how expensive plumbers are, and second, how the average person does not call a plumber for a slightly clogged toilet. Mally was confused and then asked, well, what do you do when a light bulb burns out? Change it yourself? And obviously, we were all nodding and saying yeah, absolutely. So that was when we discovered just how sheltered and out of touch Mally was with how normal people do things. We specifically learned that she didn't know how to do laundry, change a light bulb, plunge a toilet, cook literally anything, put gas in her car, all because either their maids did it for her. Also worth noting, having maids is extremely rare in our area, or her dad did. It blew her mind when we explained that those are very normal things to know how to do and ended up showing her how to do all those things. She really hated it, but it did a lot to make her a more self-reliant adult. Her parents really sheltered her so much so it wasn't totally her fault. Edit. Also, just to be clear, my friend is a very sweet, intelligent, and lovely woman. At her core, she is amazing, but just the way her parents raised her and kept her sheltered is where these issues came from. She is doing very well for herself right now and has learned a lot and has generally been very open to it. At the time of these stories, it was still very near the beginning of her having any semblance of freedom, so these examples come from literal first opportunities to show her what skills many adults have. I hope I haven't painted her in too bad of a light because she really is a sweet girl and has worked hard to open her horizons now that she even knows what horizons are out there. In my early 20s I was really poor. I lived across from a Dollar General and would frequent it for odds and ends, frequently. There was an 18 to 22-year-old girl who worked the cash register who I assumed was on the spectrum of sorts. She couldn't make eye contact, was very obviously socially awkward. She was also often very dirty and always smelled of BO. It was always weird to me because they sold deodorant. She also had one hand that was much smaller and less mobile than the other. I was always kind to her, despite her being the slowest on the cash register, part to her physical speed capabilities, part to her painful customer interactions. She constantly overshared, uncomfortably. It was what it was. It didn't bother me. I honestly felt bad for the girl, and would occasionally see bruises on her smaller hand/arm and wondered if she was abused. One day I walked into the good old DG, looking to pick up some cleaning supplies and shampoo, and saw they had a clothing sale. Before you judge, I was poor, and they didn't have the worst clothing. The sale was that certain color stickered items were $1. I browsed and actually found 5 things that weren't too terrible: some pajamas, some leggings, a piece of athletic wear. I brought up all my items, waited for a while as the girl was at the register, and brought up my 5 $1 clothing items, a spray cleaner, and a bottle of shampoo, both of which were also $1. She scanned them in and said $53. I kind of anticipated this, so I pointed to the literal 3 signs about the sale right around the register. There must have been 25 signs through the small store. I wasn't angry. She looked at me, and I explained the sticker color matches the sale and they need to be discounted. She thinks for a good long while, looking at the register, clearly in pain and not knowing what to do. Eventually, she scans the 7 items again, hits a bunch of buttons, then says, "Okay. $24. I was absolutely flabbergasted. I knew she was slower, but discovering that she couldn't figure out 5 plus 2 should be 7, and tax, absolutely shocked me and truly bummed me out. Myself and the customer behind me just stared, not knowing what to do for far too long. I eventually asked if there was anyone else working who could help. She used the store phone to call in another co-worker back in from their break. I stopped seeing her after a while, which was to be expected. I think of her often. I hope she's okay. Maybe I'm late into this, but my GF's grandfather had started to be, let's say, less accurate when peeing standing and leaving a mess in the washroom. I suggested that there's nothing wrong with sitting down for peeing and that would make life easier for everybody. All her family stared at me like in shock. True, my GF and her family didn't know that males can pee while sitting. Everybody in that family thought that as a male, the only physical way to pee is standing. I was almost asked to demonstrate in front of them that it's possible. So some background info. My dad is a mechanic, so I've been very lucky to have the importance of vehicle maintenance drilled into my head from a young age. When my now fiancée and I were dating for about 6 months, I needed to change the oil in my car, so I asked when the last time she had changed her oil. She had never changed it after owning the car for 3 years. I immediately brought it to my dad's place as I wasn't sure what to expect. We decided to add oil to properly flush it. Once we changed the oil a week later, it took 3.5 quarts of oil and the engine only holds 4 quarts total. Car still runs 2 years of regular oil changes later. To paraphrase my dad, it speaks to the quality of Kia/Hyundai engines, since most cars would have seized up given how low it was for so long. Okay, this is not quite a whilst adulting, but, for as long as I can remember, my father had red eyes after showering. I didn't even think about it. One day as a teenager, a friend slept over and in the morning she saw my dad dressed and ready for work, freshly showered, red-eyed. She asked him why his eyes were red and he simply said shampoo. She then very carefully and as respectfully as she could muster asked him why he didn't close his eyes, and he laughed and said, "What do you think, I'm an idiot? Closing my eyes in the shower?" Sheesh. My dad did a lot of things that embarrassed me, but that one was pretty high up there. I worked graveyard shift and I had to explain to a co-worker that at midnight, 12 o'clock m/0000 hours, it is the start of a new day. She then had an anxiety attack because I was telling her that today is not Monday anymore, today is Tuesday now. My co-worker, my laptop dies every weekend and has no charge on Monday morning even though it is always plugged in. I shut it down every Friday night and then turn off the power strip. It has to be broken. Give me a new one. Me, checking system info. This computer hasn't been rebooted in 36 hours. You left it on all weekend with the power strip off, so that is why the battery died. My co-worker, I don't think that's right. Me, Fasadesk. I had a relative try to put her son on the school bus his first day of kindergarten and got upset when the driver refused to let him on because he wasn't on the list. She never registered him for school and just thought she could put him on the bus and send him. This is like 10 years ago. I was dating a 32-year-old and he asked me if I wanted to get together to watch a TV show. I said sure. What time is it on? He looks it up and says to me 8 Pacific 9 Central. I asked what was confusing him and he told me he wasn't sure if the show was on at 8 or 9. My man did not know what time zone we lived in, so I was like, okay, well, you know what ocean we're near, right? Cause I was trying to get him to think about the Pacific time zone in terms of the giant body of water for which it was named, and he immediately got defensive and for real said, why would I know that? I'm from Texas. He'd been living in San Francisco for 5 years and could see the Pacific Ocean out his window. My girlfriend refuses to accept how STDs work and believes they randomly appear out of nowhere, and even when I tell her they spread from person to person, she says, that's not possible. Where did the first person get it? So I explain it, in detail, and she just goes, you're only making me feel stupid, you always do this, and then doesn't talk to me for ages. Grown-ass woman telling me it's easier to wipe, do one big wipe, from ass to vag, instead of wiping vag first then ass last. Well, guess we finally found out why she suffers from multiple UTIs a month. My ex, he didn't know how to hold a fork properly. All utensils were used by grasping it in a fist. Also didn't know how to open up baby wipes. He tore open the bag, it has a lid so they don't dry out. He ignored the lid, didn't know how to merge or change lanes. He wouldn't check blind spots or accelerate. Would actually frequently slow down and turn into cars. I attribute his lack of accidents to other safe drivers on the road. He would, instead, use a blinker when backing out of parking spaces. So people knew which way he was backing out at. Didn't know to rinse vegetables or fruits before eating. Basic shit. Like how? Don't get me started on any food prep. I often felt like a parent more than a partner, and it got old. Constantly having to teach him things he was never told or taught. You know, when they said wear a face mask, make it cover both your mouth and nose, don't touch it, wash your hands and stay home. Yeah, simple instructions, and a whole load of people can't follow them properly. That is messed up. Someone told me that their husband would put shampoo in their hair and not rinse after applying. The husband for his entire life wondered why his hair was always greasy. I had spent the night at my ex-boyfriend's place and stayed a bit longer in the morning to help clean the house. I was folding some clothes when I noticed him go from one side of the bed to another without actually doing anything. I looked at him and he looked clueless. He said, "Can you please make the bed?" I've never done this, no idea where to start. I didn't mean to have a strong reaction to it, but man did it leave me speechless. He was 26 at the time. That day I realized his mother often visited his house to make the bed and clean. Yeah. Girl I went to HS with, why do people say a quarter of an hour? Like what does that even mean? Me, it's 15 minutes. Because 15 is a fourth of 60, so that's a quarter of an hour. Her, looking at me like I'm an idiot, but a quarter is 25. Me. I asked my husband to make some herbal tea for me the first year we were married. I walked into the kitchen to find him standing over the stove with a mug of water sitting directly on the burner. Poor baby. When I first met my ex, he didn't know how to cook. 40-something-year-old at the time I met him. He only knew how to use a microwave, and the best thing he thought of cooking was chicken thighs. Chicken thighs cooked in the microwave. Everything was cooked in the microwave. Wet, soggy, colorless flesh with no flavoring. That's not how it works. That's not how any cooking should be done. This is gonna get buried. I have a buddy who I'm still good friends with but has some personal issues. Not like severe mental problems, just an extreme lack of motivation. He dropped out of college, he lives at home, and he's never had a job for more than a few weeks. In his defense, the dude is one of the most shy people I have ever met in my life, so he deserves some empathy for his inability to work. Anyways, a couple years ago me and my roommate were planning a kickback for us and some friends with bonfire, beer, barbecue, weed, the whole 9 yards. Initially we had planned on picking up our friend, but he didn't call us in time, so we ended up just going home and starting drinking. Around 11 p.m. or so our friend calls us and apologizes for his lateness. We're all like, it's cool but we can't come get you because drinking, so we suggest he gets an Uber. He says he's never heard of Uber and we explain it's like a taxi. He's baffled but downloads the app. Some time passes and he texts us in confusion that the app wanted his debit card information, to which we reply something along the lines of, well yeah, it's a ride-sharing app, of course it costs money. He's outraged that they would charge him for such a short ride and did not understand when we tried about a dozen times to explain that ride-sharing drivers deserve pay. He didn't end up getting an Uber even after we agreed to pay for IT. It was $12, and he just bows out at this point. Super weird because he was like 22 at the time but could not be convinced to take a Uber. Blew me away. We were out for a company lunch at a sports bar and one of my co-workers discreetly told me that she had pulled pork stuck in her teeth. I always keep a thing of floss in my purse, so I offered to let her have it. She gratefully accepted and then asked, "How do I use it?" She had never flossed in her life. She hadn't even had her teeth flossed at the dentist. So I took this 40-year-old woman to the ladies' room and taught her how to floss. The icing on the cake is that she's English, so I teased her about perpetuating stereotypes. If you're reading this, Viv, I love you. I've got two. A girl I knew in college. Her dad called once to remind her that every so often she needed to put oil in her truck. She did. Then her truck started smelling like French fries and then died. Even after trying to explain it, she couldn't understand that this was directly related to the quart of vegetable oil she put in the motor. Another time, another party back in college, a guy demonstrated how to shotgun a beer by shoving a steak knife into it and twisting it. Also some of his hand. He panicked like crazy. Made all kinds of noises and waved his hand around, freaking out and getting blood all over. He was a bit drunk, though, And these things happen. He got a bandage on it a minute later and he was fine. A girl my cousin and his GF set me up with, things were actually alright, we connected via similar hobbies and interest. Then about 3-ish weeks after we met I ran over to her place for reasons, and made a joke about how her laundry basket looked like it was about to explode, to which she responds, "Oh, my mom comes by on Tuesdays and does my laundry." Fast forward a bit and I learned that she at 25 didn't know how to do laundry, cook, clean, beyond moving stuff, take out trash, how the dishwasher in her apartment worked, or actually pay her own bills. It was all taken care of by her parents. They would come by every couple of days and do some laundry, dishes, etc., and she would just occupy space in the area, I guess. I did try and teach her some basic things, but it was a constant battle of "but my parents will do it for me," or "that's what Uber Eats is for," or various replies like that. I eventually had enough of it, and told her I'm done unless she can learn to do well everything her parents do for herself. Cousin and his GF had no idea the girl was like that, work friend of his GF BTW, and didn't believe me for a while till the GF went to this girl's place to drop something off and there was the girl's mom doing laundry and making breakfast, and I did have a few run-in with her parents, seemingly glad I was there to help look after and take care of her. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.